Hello guys and girls, and welcome to this video today. We're going to take just a couple of minutes in this video to talk about the ERQ that I had you all complete on Friday. I have been in the process of grading those and giving some feedback on those, and I've noticed that we've actually had quite a few friends who have just kind of missed the mark on this. And I think there might be a couple of reasons for that. The first reason, it's been a long time since we've done an ABE together, and so I think maybe we're just a little bit rusty, and that is perfectly fine. But also, I think maybe there were some of us who just didn't quite understand the question. So we're actually going to start today by going over the question again, making sure we understand, and then we're also going to be looking at part of this response together, and you'll have the opportunity to make some changes to your own ERQ, and we'll talk about that when we get to that point. First thing I want us to take a look at is just the question that we've been given. It does say use the ABE writing strategy to respond to the prompt. Remember, when we're talking about ABE, I was looking for a paragraph, and in that paragraph I needed an answer, a because, two E1s, two E2s, and a concluding sentence. And like we talked about on Friday, since it has been quite some time since we've done an ABE, I did give you sentence starters, and we'll look at those here in just a second. The question specifically asks you to think about 4 themes from the lottery. We talked last week about how stories can have many, many different themes. It's really up to the interpretation of the person who's reading it. But I pulled out 4 themes that you might have seen used in this story. Those were: people are reluctant to reject their own outdated traditions, ideas, rules, laws, and practices. Society wrongfully designates innocent scapegoats to bear the sins of the community. Following the crowd can have disastrous consequences, and the wickedness of ordinary people can be just as horrifying as the crimes of evil people. Again, like we talked about on Friday, those probably looked very familiar to you because last week we also did a card sort activity where I gave you all different quotes from the lottery, and you had to match those quotes up with these different themes. So these were not the first time we were seeing these. The directions go on to say, in a well-written paragraph, remember we're talking about an ABE here, make an argument for the theme that you feel is the most clearly portrayed in the story. Provide evidence from the text to support your answer, and explain how that evidence demonstrates the theme. So if I were to summarize that, what I was looking for you to do is to choose one of these themes, give me some evidence from the story to support that theme, and then explain to me, how did the story teach that theme? What happened in the story that showed that that is a lesson that could be learned from this text? So moving forward, if you are watching this video, it is likely because you plan to make some changes to the ERQ that you wrote on Friday for a better score. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that in this video, the theme I'm going to focus on is theme number 3. Following the crowd can have disastrous consequences. Some of you may have chosen this theme yourself, and you have already started an ERQ where you were discussing this theme. Some of you watching this video may have chosen one of the other themes. So you have a couple options here. If you were already writing about this particular theme, you're probably not going to have to make too many changes as we go through this together. If you chose 1, 2, or 4 as the theme that you were actually writing about in your response, you can either just watch through this video and kind of watch my process for explaining this one, or you can actually erase what you wrote on Friday and just start with a fresh, clean slate. The benefit of starting over and writing about this theme instead is that I'm actually going to give you the A, the B, the first E1, and the first E2 in this video. So you'll be able to take what I am saying, and half of your response is going to be done for you. You'll just have to do the second E1 and E2 in the concluding sentence. But if you don't want to erase all the work you did on Friday, I completely understand that. That's totally fine. Just watch the video and then go make changes to what you already have based on what you see in this video. If that is unclear to you, if you don't know what I'm trying to say, like, pause the video, raise your hand, I'll come talk to you about it. I would also encourage you to maybe do like a split screen moment so that you can go back and forth between what you wrote on Friday and what we discuss in the video and make changes as you need to. All right, with all that being said, we are going to jump in here and get started. Like I said, I am choosing to focus on theme number 3, Following the crowd can have disastrous consequences. I was honestly kind of surprised about how many people struggled with the A and the B box up at the top of your paper. Some people completely ignored the answer and they just started typing after the word because, which is not what we were looking for here. Remember, the first step of ABE is to answer the question. The question was, make an argument for the theme you feel is the most clearly portrayed in the story. And all you had to do, guys, after the word is fill in which theme you chose. So I gave you the theme that is most clearly portrayed in the story is. After the word is, you just had to copy and paste whichever theme you were going to talk about. Again, for me, it is following the crowd can have disastrous consequences. We are not done there because after our answer, we have to give our justification. That is our because. So I have to tell, why do I feel like this theme was the most clearly portrayed in the story? Remember when we talked about theme last week, we said that when you're trying to figure out the theme of a story, you're either going to focus on the plot of the story or the characters in the story. I chose to focus my answer on the characters. So after the word because, I said, because the characters in the lottery followed the crowd. Remember, that was part of my answer. And it led to the death of an innocent woman. That is the disastrous consequence in the story. So I had a lot of people who were trying to tell me in your answer, in your because, and even in your E2s later on, why it is bad to follow the crowd, but you weren't actually relating it back to the story. Remember, the whole purpose of this is how does the lottery show this theme? And it's because the characters followed the crowd, and the disastrous consequence was it led to the death of an innocent woman. When we are moving forward with our E1s and E2s, we're going to give evidence that shows that following the crowd led to the death of an innocent person. Again, this is one of those times where it might be helpful to have a split screen so you can pause and you can take what I have already written here and make changes to your own ERQ. But I am going to go ahead and move on. Feel free to pause the video if you need to. After we answer the question and we give our justification, we have to cite some textual evidence. For the most part, people did really well citing textual evidence. I think part of that was because we did our card sort last week, and I told you guys you really didn't even have to refer back to the text. You could simply pull your text evidence from our card sort activity. So this is one of the pieces of evidence that we had listed under the theme that we've talked about, following the crowd can have disastrous consequences. I do just want to remind you that when you are citing text evidence, guys, you're supposed to have our quotation marks before and after the quote. I had lots of friends who forgot quotation marks, so you lost some points for that. The text says, Tessie Hutchinson was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hand out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. The key word that I wanted to point out in this particular piece of evidence is the word villagers. And when I'm giving my E2 here in just a second, I'll explain why that word stood out to me so much. But again, if you need to do the split screen and pause and copy this evidence onto your own copy of the ERQ, feel free to do that. Just remember, our E1 is our evidence. It comes straight from the text and we have our quotation marks around it. After our E1, we are moving on to the E2, which is our explanation. I ran into a lot of friends who were trying to tell me, I've already said this once in this video, why it's a bad thing in the real world to follow the crowd and how it can lead to disastrous consequences. I appreciate that you are making those connections to your own life, but I do want to remind you guys that our question was, make an argument for the theme you feel is most clearly portrayed in the story, and then it says to explain how the evidence demonstrates the theme. It does not say explain how this theme has been true in your own life. It says explain how the evidence demonstrates the theme. So in your E2s, you shouldn't be relating the evidence to your own life. You should be relating the evidence to the story and showing how it proves that the theme is true in this story. I also want to remind you that your E2s are supposed to be at least 2 sentences. I had a lot of friends who were trying to cut some corners and you were giving me very short sentences. So you might have had 2 sentences in your E2, but I still needed more information because if your sentences are only a few words long, you're really not fully explaining your ideas. Remember I said that the word villagers is going to be important here. This piece of evidence particularly stood out to me because it doesn't say that specific people in the village were participating in the lottery. It was literally every single person, from the oldest man in town, Old Man Warner, down to the children. Even Tessie's own young son had to participate in the lottery. So when I am explaining my evidence, I'm going to make sure I bring that up because my quote or my theme was following the crowd, meaning everybody's doing it. So this evidence demonstrates the theme by showing that the entire village was involved in Tessie's death. Like I said, it wasn't just a small group of people, it was literally everybody. When you get to that second sentence of your E2, one piece of advice that I've given you guys this year is to try to incorporate an if-then statement because those help you to expand on your ideas. Using the word because can also be really helpful. So, this evidence demonstrates the theme by showing that the entire village was involved in Tessie's death if just one person had spoken up, if one person had chosen to not follow the crowd, then this disaster could have been avoided. Remember, I'm trying to prove that following the crowd can have disastrous consequences, so I wanted to use the word disaster in my E2. I didn't feel like I quite had enough information there, so I actually added another sentence. It is okay to have more than 2 sentences. It's not okay to have less. Instead, they all followed the crowd and proved that doing so can lead to disaster. So again, I'm just trying to tie everything back to my answer up at the top, back to the theme that I identified. So if we put it all together, here's what we've got so far. The theme that is the most clearly portrayed in this story is following the crowd can have disastrous consequences because the characters in the lottery followed the crowd and it led to the death of an innocent woman. That's the disaster. The text says Tessie Hutchinson was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. We have quotation marks around our quote. We chose this one because it has the word villagers, which shows that this was everybody, not just specific people. This evidence demonstrates the theme by showing that the entire village was involved in Tessie's death. If just one person had spoken up, then this disaster could have been avoided. Instead, they all followed the crowd and proved that doing so can lead to disaster. This is where I'm going to leave you. You have one more E1 and one more E2 and your concluding sentence to complete here. Remember, your evidence can come straight from the card sort activity that we did on Thursday last week. And then when you get to your E2, at least 2 sentences, but if you need more, give me more. And then make sure when you're giving your E2, you're not telling me how this theme applies to your life, but you're telling me how the theme was shown in the story. Was there a specific character that showed it? Was it through the plot that showed it? Make sure you're tying it all back to the story that we read last week. Okay, I'm not going to say anything else. If you have any questions, raise your hand, let me know, and I can't wait to see your all's rewrites.